Welcome to the EVready podcast, featuring industry leaders and their perspectives on electrification, hosted by EVready Energy. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the EVready podcast. I am grateful to have Heiko Schmidt, VP of Network Strategy and Monetization at Mercedes Benz High Powered Charging North America. Heiko, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
I think our listeners are specifically going to have a lot of interest in this one because there's been so much talk around fast charging networks and things that have been going on in the industry recently. Obviously, the announcement that Mercedes was going to build a network was a really big deal. And you have that initial site in Georgia right now. That looks great. So really appreciate you taking the time to have a discussion. Before we kind of get into Mercedes, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up getting to this point.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a Mercedes veteran, as they say. So I've been with the company for a long, long time. Can't tell you exactly how long because then I'm aging myself here. But I started off on the German side, spent 10 years or so in Mercedes headquarters in Stuttgart, and then came to the US in 2011 in various roles, really doing a lot of product management, bringing vehicles to the market all the way from its initial design phase. Ran AMG in the US for a couple of years, but then transitioned increasingly to the electric side. And for the past years, focused almost exclusively on consumer-facing charging for Mercedes in the US, right? Really realizing how important that is. And we'll get to that, I'm sure, later. But we realized we can't figure out electric if we can't figure out charging. Yeah, through that came connected with Andrew Cornelia. When our board first decided, hey, we're going to build our own network, and officially joined Andrew's team and our CFO's team here. I think is employee number 3 for this company as of October last year. So it's been a little bit of a journey.
And how big of a team do you have now?
We're up to around about 20 folks. So we can talk a little bit about the setup as well. Obviously, we have a very strong partner we're working with, M&8, and they have a dedicated team. This as well, dedicated in the sense of just focusing on MB/HPC, building our network, and then running and maintaining it as well. So obviously, if we count all employees working on this right now, we're probably up to 80.
Wow, that was fast.
Yeah, scaling quickly for sure.
Good for you. That's awesome. And so you elaborated on it a little bit there, but if you can dig a little bit deeper into this, how was the idea of building the fast charging network for Mercedes Benz? How did that come to life? You mentioned that you knew you needed to get good at charging, but tell us that story.
Yeah, let's start with some of the global targets, right, that Mercedes has, and clearly, Mercedes is very, very dedicated to the transition to electric. Right, there's a pretty ambitious target to be completely carbon neutral by 2039 across our supply chain, and you realize pretty quickly you don't become that kind of company if you just launch a couple of electric cars, right? That's a great start, but you got to do more. So charging being such an essential part of EV ownership, Mercedes actually consolidated all their charging dedicated or related resources into one charging unit. This happened last year, and focuses on the whole chain of charging, from home charging, charging at work certainly is a part of it, public charging, and also building our own network, right? And again, the whole idea is that we want to own this part of the customer experience. It's such an essential part of EV ownership. And as I said before, if we don't figure out charging, we don't think we can be successful in this transition to electric. So that's where it all stemmed from. And the board made a pretty significant commitment when it comes to investment into this dedicated network.
And so, in my past background, I think I did something very similar to what you guys were doing, going out, finding sites, developing those agreements, and building, the intention is to build obviously a world-class experience, especially for Mercedes. You have obviously Tesla. Everyone knows Tesla. You have Electrify America coming from the Volkswagen mitigation settlement. EVgo coming from before that, coming from the Enron situation. Um, why not let the private fast charging market develop organically with all this funding that's available and companies that are interested in doing this? Why did you feel, or why did Mercedes feel the need to take this on themselves?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, initially, if you just think a few years back, Mercedes took very much that position, right? Charging was kind of seen as the necessary evil, if you will. But just like Mercedes didn't get into gas stations, there was a belief, why would we get into charging? But again, that changed quickly when we realized that the experience that our customers have out there today is just not what we would like to see. And that's related to just sheer quantity of charging stations not being available, uptime, reliability, but then also just the consumer experience while you charge, even if you're successfully charging, but what do you do while you charge? So as a result, you see that charging remains one of the main purchase barriers, or the lack of public charging infrastructure, right? To be precise. And we can talk a little bit more about where the industry stands overall. I think the little bit of a blip we're seeing right now, where the growth for EV sales has slowed down a little bit, certainly has to do with that. So if anything, that was tailwind for us, right? And say, hey, this becomes even more important. So I think it's a great proposition. I think OEMs are in a great position to get involved in this space, right? We have the capacity, we have the resources. In case of Mercedes, we have a brand heritage of over 130 years. Certain promises we are making to the customers today through our vehicles, of quality, of experience. And now for the first time, Mercedes is extending this beyond the vehicle, right? And really saying, hey, we can apply this experience to charging, and that's incredibly exciting. And I think it's something that'll drive the industry forward, and certainly something that will help EV sales, not just on the Mercedes side, but for other brands as well.
And right now there seems like there's a transition overall in the marketplace from like a straight to BEV transition to partially plug-in hybrid as well. How does that impact the development of this network for you?
Not much, I would say. I mean, first of all, it's a network that is open to all brands, right? So we're not just inviting Mercedes customers to come, and that's important. I mean, we'd love to see as many drivers of other brands as possible. Plugins, they've become pretty good, and I think there are, a good way to bridge some of the gaps. If you're not ready yet completely to go from ICE to full electric, then a plugin could be a good proposition for you. And I mean, fair to say that plug-in drivers are less likely, right, to charge at public chargers, at least high power charging stations,
For sure.
as they're traveling, etc. Right, much more focused on home charging. However, if I look at Mercedes specifically, I mean, all our plugins have a DC charging port. They get the same 2 years of free charging. So we'll see. We'll look at the data. But I think more importantly, long term, I think there's no doubt that we will see the transition to full electric continue. And we're building a network that is future proof, right? A network for the future. So certainly taking a look at what the next years will look like. But long term, we're confident we'll see the utilization and the demand here from the full electric vehicles that will come into the marketplace.
And how is the experience of the Mercedes Benz fast charging network going to differentiate from Tesla and some of the others? Will there be any type of like a unique experience that Mercedes Benz is providing customers that feels differentiated in some way?
Yeah, I mean, a lot is just, I mentioned the term quality and experience now a number of times, right? And I think we see a little bit of a shift in the industry right now where there's a stronger focus, and that's a good thing, on this quality charging experience, right? So it's not just about getting the charging right. I mean, that seems to be difficult enough, right? I mean, we tend to talk about this quality, this pyramid of charging needs, right? And all the way at the bottom, you have uptime and reliability, safety, obviously, right? And only if you get that right, we talk about speed, we talk about ease of authentication and payment, and then quality of amenities, etc. So I think for us, it's really about what you do while you charge. And in an ideal situation, charging should fade into the background, right? Talk about reducing inconvenience time. So if you get to a charging station and you have 10, 20, 30 minutes to spare, and you can now do what you really want to do during that time, then it's not inconvenient for you. It's not a waste of time, right? So this focus on quality, this focus on making sure that our customers have the ability to spend the time in a valuable way, I think is something that is new to the industry. And again, we see this picked up now a couple of times, which is promising. Beyond that, obviously strong focus on speed, right? 400 kilowatts only at this point, which gets great feedback. You mentioned Sandy Springs earlier. We have 12 other sites already live across the Southeast as well. And we're very happy with the customer feedback that we're seeing. And we're a little picky as well as to how we develop our network. So a little bit more of a focused approach, if you will. Definitely wanting to build where we see the demand either today or tomorrow. So we're not going to build a coast-to-coast coverage network, but this will be very much a more focused, higher quality network that we're trying to build here.
And I think you're going to be charging cars at these higher speeds. I'm sure that's going to be a big focus. Can you talk a little bit about the vehicles themselves, what you expect the vehicles to take in terms of speeds in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's promising to see that we see the shift to 800, 900,000 volt architecture, right, with charging speeds going up to 270, 350 kilowatts, right? And again, talking about a future-proof network, our hardware can sustain that, right? Where today we have up to 400 kilowatts on a single port. Obviously, you can split that in 2 times 200. So in the future, vehicles will be able to take advantage of that even more. And when I look at Mercedes, and there's been public announcements about the switch to 800 volt with the first vehicle launching on the MMA architecture. So we'll see those charging speeds. We won't get quite to a gas stop, right? But we'll get pretty darn close. And I think that's all part of the quality and of the experience that we're trying to look at. It's like reduce that charging time as much as we can, and therefore, frankly, also justifying the investment, right, into this kind of hardware and network, because you could build cheaper charging stations, right, a cheaper site with slower hardware. But I think it's the right call to make for sure.
And do you think that this network is so obviously it's a public charging network and it's for all different brands? How do you see this impacting some of the medium duty vehicles that Mercedes might be selling at some of their locations?
Yeah, we obviously want to incorporate those needs as well. If you look at the site we built in Sandy Springs, it's got a pull-through stall, which is very convenient for a Sprinter van or any other medium-duty commercial vehicle. Also works great if you're towing, right? So we're not building Sprinter or medium-duty commercial vehicle capable stalls on every site, but where we can and where it makes sense, right? For also from an economical perspective, we're definitely incorporating that into our site design, whether that's just a longer stall, right, for the longer wheelbases, or whether that's an actual pull-through stall, which is not always an easy conversation with a side host as well, right?
Yeah.
Because now you're taking up more space, but we're definitely seeing some potential there.
And how do you see solar battery storage? You talked a lot about the real goal of creating cleaner transportation. How do you, what are some of the other things that you're doing on the energy production side or the storage side to, I guess, achieve your goals?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to mention M&A here as a great partner, right? Obviously, they have a lot of experience in the renewable energy space, right? And I mean, all our energy is clean energy, right? Meaning we're offsetting with CO2 certificates, and we could see definitely in the medium term that we're actually seeing energy from renewable sources directly at a site, right? It's probably going to be a site-specific discussion, but I think that's something that would add a lot of value. We have, wherever we build canopies, we will have solar panels. Obviously, those are not really powerful enough to power the chargers, right? But you mentioned also battery backup can be a solution. We haven't really prioritize this for our initial sites, but it's definitely something on the radar, and can make sense, whether it's to offset some of the demand charges, or just build a more reliable site in California, etc. So I think there are plenty of ideas on how we can incorporate some of the new technology, and again, future-proofing our site, and delivering on that promise.
So I think like the big announcement that was made a few months ago that everybody was really curious about was Ionna, and the idea that this nationwide fast charging network was going to be built by auto manufacturers. I've always kind of
Mhm.
like personally looked at fast charging in that, like, right now you're seeing a lot of fueling and convenience, obviously own gas stations. That's what the world knows today. But for me, the networked component of charging allows companies that have a core business to drive that core business and provide certain value to end users through that network. So I've always kind of thought auto manufacturers at the end of the day were gonna own most of the fast chargers in the United States. Could be wrong long term, just one guy's thought. So it kind of made sense, to me when Mercedes made the announcement, and then with Iona as well. How is Mercedes Benz working with Iona? Can you explain that to everybody?
I'm sure that's a question that many people have been asking themselves, right? Because the announcements came out within, I think, a few months of each other. Now, I mean, that's a great question. And first and foremost, both networks will be separate in the marketplace, right? We will be competitors in the marketplace. So there's not a ton of collaboration amongst the two. But I think what it all comes down to is the sheer need of chargers to support the growth in the EV industry, right? And there is space for multiple players, right, in this area, even within Mercedes. I mean, Mercedes is so committed to the transition to electric, and again, realizing how important the buildup of public charging infrastructure is. Definitely discussed this at length and decided, hey, there's room for both of these initiatives, right? I think when you just look at what was communicated, you could think, oh, it's a pretty similar approach. In reality, I think the network in our focus is slightly different. Obviously, Ionna consisting of 7 OEMs, there's a lot of firepower there, with very ambitious targets of building, the 30,000 ports by the end of this decade. So definitely very large coverage network, whereas our focus on the MB/HPC side is a little bit more focused. Definitely higher on the quality, and I mentioned earlier, less the ambition to truly provide coast-to-coast coverage, but really focusing on those areas, whether that's metropolitan areas, metropolitan markets, or key corridors where we see the demand, right, where we see the utilization happening. So, I mean, in the end, Mercedes has said we're committed to getting involved in this space, right? And I think both Ionna and MB/HPC are a great expression and really putting our money where our mouth is on making this happen as part of the bigger initiative on charging within Mercedes. Right? I mentioned home charging earlier. There's so many other initiatives going on to really cover all aspects of consumer-facing charging, and I think both MB/HPC and we have to come up with a different name. I know our marketing team is working on it. And Ionna definitely have a space there.
Got it. Got it. Um, you know, I think one thing that some other auto manufacturers have done a good job of is build that center dash experience. I think the obvious one's Tesla. Is what I'm really getting at in the United States, make it very easy to drive around. And I know for you and for Mercedes, you're doing the same thing. You're building a certain experience. Could you talk to us about the in-vehicle integration to support the customer's charging experience, and also like um, how it integrates into the experience that you're developing at these locations?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a hugely important point, right? And now I'm thinking back into my previous role with Mercedes USA, where I had the pleasure to not only run the consumer-facing charging initiatives, but also oversee product management for our electric cars, right, for quite some time. And we took a close look at who's that initial customer, right? Who we saw when we launched the EQS, and lots of those folks purchasing or leasing these cars were first-time EV owners, and that's something we've seen consistently now for the past years, and that's a good thing, right? If we're successfully transitioning not only Mercedes customers, but any ICE customer from other brands as well into an electric Mercedes, that's great. But it brings the challenge, right, of a customer now coming in and never having driven electric before. Our dealers do a great job in training the customer, but there's so much more that needs to be done that can be brought across in just 10, 15 minutes of delivery time. So in the end, this all comes to how do you create a seamless customer experience, right, that is somewhat intuitive. And I think the way charging is integrated in the head unit is hugely important there, and it shouldn't be complicated. So starting from how do you search for a charging station, right, to the point where you get to a charger, how do you authenticate, right? And obviously plug and charge is absolutely key there. To being able to adjust certain settings, it all needs to be easily understandable. For me, the focus on the Mercedes side has been for the longest time on what we call navigation with electric intelligence. And what it really means is leave the work to the car. When you plan a road trip and you're going from A to B, you're exceeding the range of your vehicle, right? The car will do all the planning for you. It'll tell you exactly where to stop, for how long, right? Which charges to apply. And if that charger turns to be occupied, it'll pick a different charger for you. So there's actually not that much of pre-planning that needs to be done, right? And that's something we want to convey. That's something we want to continue to improve. It's certainly not perfect yet, but I think that's something that we've seen to be a pretty consistent effort in the industry. And in the end, I think that will reduce the purchase barriers towards EV adoption quite a bit, because it will instill confidence in customers, right, that they can manage the charging, which still seems like this big mountain to overcome.
Yeah, in a world where there's not a ton of infrastructure, exactly what you just mentioned, the car telling you where to go, how long to stay, where the next place is to go is just so important. I think that's something that's been missing probably from 2015 in general, 2015 to present day in the industry. And once the car tells you what to do, life is easy and more convenient
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, the way it should be, right? And again, there can be a lot of technical sophistication in the background on the surface, right? Like facing the consumer, it just needs to be as easy and intuitive as possible. And I hate to always bring up the Apple and iPhone example, right? But that's kind of how it should work, right? I know Android users are now going to be upset with me, but for me, it's still the best example of making sophisticated technology still somewhat easy to use, and that's what we need to get to here as well.
Yeah, I think the stat in the United States right now is 93% of Gen Z has an iPhone.
Mhm.
And that probably all started in 2015. And now, that software has created like this entrenched loyalty, obviously. And whenever I talk about EV, I always, in a public setting, I always kind of bring that up. Like, look, like I don't know exactly how software is going to impact vehicles because like you're looking at your phone probably, let's just call it like 90% of the day, where you're probably only driving your car 5% of the day, something like that. But still, how important is that software to creating some type of a loyalty that once it's too deep, people can't go back?
Yeah. Well, and that other piece is, you go from an iPhone 8 to an iPhone 14. In its core, right, it still works the same way.
Yeah.
And it should be the same with the vehicle, right? If you're switching from, just stick with the Mercedes example, right? You're switching from a uh, Mercedes GLE SUV into an EQE SUV or EQS SUV. In its core, that vehicle is still going to be a Mercedes, and it's going to drive like a Mercedes, right? It has the same features that uh, make up a Mercedes when it comes to quality, safety, comfort, all of that. And I think the more we can deliver that same feeling in terms of customers hopping into this vehicle for the first time and feel like, hey, I'm familiar with this. I know how to drive this car. Yes, there is no engine noise, and I need to charge rather than gas up. But in the end, 98% of what I'm used to is still here. Um, that's a good thing. And again, that's where charging, coming back to charging, right, needs to just be seamless and integrate well there and not be this really tricky, complex thing to overcome.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And how are you handling obviously you're going to have some cars that are going to have CCS1. You're going to have other ones in a few years that are NACS. How are you deploying those plugs?
We'll have both on our sites, right? So we'll retrofit existing sites with NUX ports, and then we're opening up our hardware portfolio a little bit. And as we're rolling out further hardware, those will have NUX ports as well. So we'll cater to both customers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. A little bit of a transition right now, but hopefully eventually that'll make everything feel easier as well.
100%. Again, looking at this through the consumer lens, right? I think that's if we, the more standardization we see there, I think the more beneficial, the more valuable for everybody.
So obviously you have the site in Georgia, which is a beautiful site. If anybody hasn't seen it before, if you want to just speak a little bit about that site, but then the next question is, where can people expect to see some chargers springing up shortly? And the most selfish question is, when are we going to see one in New England?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so we built Sandy Springs. The site opened in November of last year. We built that in record speed, and really huge kudos here to the M&A team, the ops team. Like that site, I remember my desk at MBUSA was right at the corner overlooking that area, and looking down in June of 2023, and there was still just nothing. And then in record speed, that site came up. Obviously, creating a lot of buzz in the industry. Up to this point, I really think this is the most beautiful charging station in the United States. The way it's been designed, but then also executed. So we have 8 ports, 400 kilowatts, right, with the charge point hardware. We have a canopy with solar panels. We have a dedicated customer lounge, right, that is open. We have restrooms. They're clean, right? They're well maintained. It's a great space to hang out. And customer comments and feedback have just been fantastic, right? So that was the first site we brought live, and it's back then we would have called this a flagship site. We actually have some ideas now on how we can even increase the level of customer experience here. Really take this up a notch even. So stay tuned for that. But since then, we've built 12 additional sites with one of our first big site partners, Buc-ee's, right? So along travel centers, primarily in the Southeast, which is where the Bucky's footprint is. For those folks in Texas, they'll know what I'm talking about. It's an institution, right? It's a great place. It's a great fit for us. It's a great place to spend 20, 30 minutes, very clean restrooms, amenities. So that's been working really, really well. So we'll continue to expand that footprint with Bucky's as they expand as well to areas outside of the Southeast. The next big site host that we publicly announced is Simon Malls, right? Obviously having a bunch of properties, again, great fit with a very similar focus on customer experience. So we'll likely see the first sites at Simon Properties go live this year, if not early next year. And working on further, let's say, master agreements or collaborations with other big site hosts. So stay tuned. Obviously, right now our focus or our network is a little biased towards the Southeast. In the end, we want to build a nationwide network. So you'll definitely see sites as constructions allows. It's as we go out to the West Coast, it just gets a little trickier. Lead times get a little longer. But we'll see some sites pop up there. We have very ambitious targets for 2025 in terms of ports we want to bring live, and certainly the Northeast is one of the core areas as well. So definitely area here in New York, but also heading up north, you'll see some sites go up there.
Awesome. Yeah, obviously utility timelines are not short up here either, so I'm sure we'll have to be patient up here as well.
Yeah, if we could execute quicker, we would, for sure.
Yeah.
But again, our teams are doing a fantastic job in accelerating where they can.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the questions I had. So I just want to thank you for taking the time. I think a lot of people are really interested, especially after that first site, to see a network, the quality of that first site come out and be able to use it. I know I am. And it's definitely needed in the United States right now. And so really looking forward to seeing the pins and the dots on the map come together to build this fast charging network across the US.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Certainly an exciting time, right, to be in this industry with all the change that's happening. No, it's been fun. Thanks for having me on. It was fun to chat.
Awesome. Thanks again.